Today, I want to talk to you about trees. Yes, trees. If someone were telling me this was a sermon topic, I probably would wonder what there is to say. Trees are trees. They grow, they reproduce, they die. We find them useful for so many reasons. Most of the time, we might think of trees as objects, alive and only useful for the good their products provide or the benefit they produce for us. It is difficult to imagine trees in another context. Along the way, though, I found a book by a German man named Peter Wohlleben entitled The Hidden Lives of Trees, What They Feel, How They Communicate, Discoveries from a Secret World. The book drew me in because it told about the ways that trees are and how they interact with each other and other species. It opened my life to a different world, albeit one that has been nearby all of my existence. There is a form of science that inspires me. It is the science that demonstrates connections. Trees inspire me as I learn more about them for that reason. They become less like objects and more like life forms that I do not understand. They are an unfolding mystery to me in themselves, and though I will take them as objects, I use things that are made of wood, I will know that they are still more than that. And that is one of the lessons that I take from the hidden life of trees. They communicate. They have strategies for reproduction. They have sophisticated ways to deal with predators. They live their lives in community. Even though they do compete with each other sometimes, trees also share for the common good. Peter Wohlleben tells a story about this when he was a younger forester walking through the forest he manages in Germany. He came across a patch of strange-looking mossy stones of old beech trees, amid old beech trees. He realized that he had passed them many times without noticing. That day, though, he lifted the moss on one of the stones and found tree bark underneath instead of stones. Taking out his pocket knife, he carefully scraped the root bark until he encountered a moist green layer, a color green that is from chlorophyll stored in trees, living trees. That meant that the wood in the root was still alive. Then Wohlleben noticed that the roots were arranged in a circular pattern, 5 feet in diameter, leading at the center to a stump. He examined the stump of a tree, and because he knew the history of the forest, he knew that it had been felled 400 or 500 years ago. The interior of the stump had long since rotted away. Living plant cells require sugar to survive, and trees get that sugar through photosynthesis in the leaves. But the roots of that tree were still alive. For about half a millennium, those roots had not been attached to a living tree. But how could the roots be still alive? The tree was getting help from neighboring trees. Trees, even trees not of differing species, might help each other when they experience stress. They will move resources from their roots to the roots of neighboring trees. And how do they know that their neighboring tree is under stress? They communicate by releasing scents and also chemicals. And they also communicate by fungi. Scientific experiments have proven that trees in need release signals through their intertwined roots, and nearby trees transfer nutrients to the tree in need. They can also provide mutual protection. Around 1980, scientists on the African savanna observed The giraffes were feeding on an umbrella thorn acacia tree and a stand, and left abruptly to go to another stand of umbrella thorn acacia trees more than 100 feet away. This was an unusual pattern for them because they noticed that the giraffes were only feeding for a few minutes. This was a repeated behavior on other occasions. The scientists discovered that it took the acacia tree mere minutes to start pumping out toxic substances into its leaves after the giraffes started eating their leaves. The giraffes bypassed the other acacias in the stand to go further away. Why? The other acacia trees in that stand smelled, and I use that word in quotes because we don't know exactly the way that the other trees knew. They detected the toxin that the tree had released and released their own toxins as well. The giraffes knew that they only had a few minutes of munching before all the acacias knew about them and released their toxins simultaneously. They went to the other trees because they knew that those other acacias farther away could not smell the toxins from the other stand of trees. But this scent also works with animals. When they are attacked by an insect or insects, some trees will emit an odor that attracts the predators of the insects that are eating them. They are connected to their predator's predator. Fungi are the base of an old forest. A single fungus can cover an immense area, even many square miles. Trees can send electrical impulses to each other through this fungal internet, exchanging information about insects, drought, and other dangers. Scientists actually refer to this as the Wood Wide Web. It really is an existing thing. Fungi seem to grow in ways that further this form of communication, though more research needs to be done. This discovery caused scientists to question the assumption that fungi were merely parasites and to view the possibility that the fungi and the trees had a more symbiotic relationship, with both gaining some benefit from their connection. Wohlleben states that people visit the forest he manages to breathe in the forest air. Forests act as filters for air. Trees filter particles such as soot, pollen, and dust. They absorb the toxins from human activities such as hydrocarbons, acid, and nitrogen compounds. In late April 2020, during the pandemic, I sensed the change in the air quality in southern New Jersey. Because of the decrease in human activity due to COVID-19 and the resultant release of pollutants, the air had a sweet smell, for a lack of a better term. I breathed in more deeply. I knew something had changed. The trees were also better able to filter out the pollutants. And I saw the honeybees in my neighborhood for the first time in years. And yes, I've mentioned this before because it was such a wondrous experience. Trees are not the same, though, and the air in different kinds of forests is different. Deciduous trees and coniferous trees make very different kinds of forests. Deciduous trees, often called broadleaf trees, make forests that have a broad tree canopy. They are cool and hold in moisture. They do not release their stress chemicals very often. Deciduous trees connect with each other, even across species, and share nutrients when they are under stress. And so they don't need to release a lot of stress chemicals because when they are in stress, another tree will help them out. Coniferous trees, spruces, and pines make forests that are far more stressful because they do not share resources with each other in the ways that deciduous trees do. Conifers are more threatened by drought, injury, and predators. They do not filter out chemicals and dust as well as deciduous trees do. They are usually thirsty. Their bark is not as effective against predators. They tend to release frequently stress chemicals. It is possible that this kind of thing affects human beings as well, that we are absorbing the stress that the conifers are releasing chemically. And amazingly, there is some scientific evidence for this. Some experiments have suggested that humans are susceptible to the chemicals that trees release. The blood pressure of human visitors to forests rises when they are under coniferous forests, the pine trees and the like, and decreases in broadleaf forests. We may be subconsciously responding to the trees that we encounter in ways that we cannot yet understand. Trees are important to the earth as a whole. They are also essential for the food chain on Earth, even in the oceans. A scientist at Hokkaido University in Japan discovered that leaves falling into streams and rivers leach acids into the oceans that stimulate the growth of plankton, the first and most important building block in the food chain. More fish because of the forest. The researcher encouraged the government to plant more trees in coastal areas, which did, in fact, lead to higher yields for fisheries and oyster growers because the creatures that were near the mouths of the rivers leading to the ocean were supplying energy for the plankton, which led to more animals living in those zones. Through the sharing of nutrients between different species, trees prove that caring for others, somewhat unlike themselves, is not solely a human trait, but is also part of some in the natural world. This is done for mutual benefit, though it underscores that life is interconnected and the world is not as one might imagine. The other lesson in all this is that we know very little about the world we inhabit. The world holds many mysteries and new things to learn. When I was younger, the message was given that science knew everything or would know everything. During my lifetime, so many things that I learned were in fact overturned. Science, still a valid way of knowing the universe, still does not know everything. In fact, we've only just begun. My spiritual awakening occurred in broadleaf woods. Like Emerson, I feel more at home in a forest than anywhere else. My senses are alert to the sounds and the smells. In a forest, I feel closest to the spirit of life. That experience, that awakening, caused me to be curious about what that experience meant. I found a person who taught me something. Uh, Merce Eliade was a student of Carl Jung, a professor of religious anthropology. Eliade was a professor of religious anthropology at the University of Chicago and resident in my seminary's housing. Unfortunately, he died a few years before I attended my seminary. Eliade studied themes across religions and discovered that almost every religion has what he called an axis mundi. An axis mundi is something like a tree form that goes from the earth into the sky. Think of the Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, the Bodhi tree in Buddhism, the cross in Christianity, the obelisk in ancient Egypt, totem poles in many religions of indigenous peoples. Eliada wondered if our minds held the forests as holy, sacred, safe places. So I ask you, what does a tree mean to you? What does being in nature generally mean to you? On this Sunday before Earth Day, we can acknowledge the important lesson that the broadleaf trees teach us to support one another. On this day, we can also acknowledge that our congregation has been involved in planting trees and other indigenous plants. Stewardship of Earth's resources is significant for our faith tradition as we affirm the interdependent web of all existence. The future of the Earth depends upon the human species moving to a different relationship with all life. You can start with a walk in the woods. In closing, I'd like to share with you the message that Peter Wohlleben, the author of The Hidden Life of Trees, wants to take from this work, this information that he's given us. He goes into a kind of joy and mysticism. He writes, "We shouldn't be concerned about trees purely for material reasons. We should care about them because of the little puzzles and wonders they present us with. Under the empty canopy of the trees, daily dramas and moving love stories are played out. Here is the last remaining piece of nature, right at our doorstep, where adventures are to be experienced and secrets discovered. And perhaps, who knows, the language of trees will eventually be deciphered, giving us the raw material for further amazing stories. Until then, when you take your next walk in the forest, give free rein to your imagination. In many cases, what you imagine is not so far removed from reality after all."